Welcome to a special New Year edition of the Craftsmen Online podcast. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, Editor-in-Chief of CraftsmenOnline.com. A reminder as we begin all of our episodes that the viewpoints expressed on this podcast are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body of which that member may hail. I'm very excited as we've done something new, entering a new year, 2022. And we're going to do so by taking a look back at the top 10 Craftsmen Online podcasts for 2021. What's special to me and the working group here at Craftsmen Online is on Monday, March 14th, we launched the Craftsmen Online podcast. Our goal was to present weekly discussions of Masonic experiences, themes, and topics from our brothers all around New York State. And over this year, we've expanded beyond our jurisdiction into others. Closing out season 1, I am so looking forward to kicking off season number 2 with our first new episode of the year on Monday, January 10th. So for the next 2 weeks, I hope you indulge us as we give a second listen to the 10 most listened to episodes of 2021.
Number 10.
Our countdown begins with the 10th most listened to episode on Clandestine Freemasonry. And my guest for that episode was Brother Eddie Abdul, who's a Master Mason from Compact Lodge number 402. Eddie's since relocated to Utah with his family for his career. But in this episode, he opened up about his personal experience as a clandestine Mason who discovered, after almost 3 years, that he was not a member of an accepted or recognized lodge. At what point did you start to go, this isn't Freemasonry, or maybe this isn't for me? When did you start questioning things?
I would say very quickly after I started to actually go to meetings and really see what was going on. I wasn't getting what I wanted, and it was just money. All they ever talked about was dues and who owes, and
gotcha.
It was just all about money. Getting the rentals. And so I realized and said, wait a minute, I'm not getting this is not what I came for.
And to like your close friends and your loved ones, your family, your lady, you're telling them, hey, I'm going to lodge meetings. Was it 2 times a month? Couple times?
Once a month.
Once a month. Okay. So you're going to lodge and I'm wearing this dark suit and tie or a tuxedo that I had to buy myself.
Yep.
And I'm following this thing, and they think that you are an upright man and Freemason as we would, determine it. I'm just curious, like, what it must have been like to invest not only the money that you were putting into it, but the time and the trust that you had into this thing that you believed that it was what you thought it was.
I had met another brother from the New York Grand Lodge, from Compact Lodge, actually. And we had just met because we were going through a spiritual journey. And he told me, he said, hey, I have another Mason that's coming over that wants to join the house.
Okay,
great. And we're there talking, and I told him my lodge, and it never heard of it. And, and never heard of the Grand Lodge, and it kind of sealed the deal for me. And I was like, and I mean, I tell you, it was like if my head was an egg and it cracked open.
Gotcha. And
all this light just came to me like at one shot. And it was like, you kind of knew this was coming. You kind of had an idea that this was coming. You were wrestling. I was wrestling with it at night when I would go to meetings or when I would go to Grand Lodge, quarterlies. I'm wrestling with it because, we're meeting in different places. All of a sudden, we don't have our own Grand Lodge building. We're renting space at another Grand Lodge or in the basement of a church. And I'm like, come on, these guys don't have their stuff together here. This can't be real.
Our podcast is open to anyone that subscribes to any podcast anywhere in the world. And I'm sure that we have a couple brothers who are listening now that maybe internally are asking these same questions that you asked before you joined a recognized lodge. What advice would you give them when it comes to seeking true Masonic light? I'm
real. And I appreciate it so much. And maybe I appreciate it more than someone that's never gone through that, because, to feel that at one point, hey, I might not be recognized till No, I'm recognized. I'm definitely, I'm good. I'm ready for this test. This is a test that I know I'm going to pass. I'm excited to take it as well. Yeah, definitely ready for that.
We're counting down the 10 most listened to podcast episodes of 2021 at Craftsmen Online. And up next, we are going to geek out. The ninth spot on our countdown, it was the first episode on comics and the craft. We discussed the Green Lantern and Freemasonry with Worshipful Brother Joseph Evans, who's the master of Van Rensselaer Lodge, number 87.
Number 9.
Hal Jordan is, he gets his ring charged by a light source. Freemasons, we are pursuing a light source or enlightenment. And we're only as powerful as our mind, our thoughts are that we're able to project through the craft ourselves.
There's 7 colors of these rings. So within these 7 colors, of course, we have green, and green is enacted by willpower. So anything that Hal Jordan thinks in his mind, he can project, he can design. And what is on our rings, we have the letter G, which represents geometry. And we hear about this geometry inside the middle chamber lecture. And with geometry, we use this to create certain designs, create certain efforts, and it all comes from our mind, all from one thought. Mm-hmm. So what we think, we can manifest. And with this green ring, it literally stands for willpower. So his willpower is what? His willpower is fortitude. So we know what that means. It's when we go in for our 3rd degree, right before our fellow crafts go through, and they're told immediately, hey, you guys are going to have some great fortitude to get through this. Because why? Your life may depend on it. So fortitude is willpower. So that connection right there, when I thought about that, I'm like, that makes perfect sense.
The ring chooses the wearer. It deems who is worthy. I guess we could go ahead and use that term. And in Freemasonry, sure. If we're going to stick with the ring theme, like you could go out and buy a ring. Most guys do. Some you get, a ring that was given to you. It's, an heirloom that goes to the family, or a past master's ring, or some honor that you have that's given to you as a gift from the lodge. But the main thing is that we always talk about, Freemasons are made first a Mason in their heart, and then the second place that they're made a Mason is actually when they go and pursue membership at a Masonic lodge. Another connection to the Green Lantern Corps. Hal Jordan didn't wake up in the morning wanting to be a superhero. It was chosen for him to be one.
And earlier you had mentioned about being so esoteric, and just in this this righteous life, this worthy brother life of being a Mason. I got to say, there's sometimes in my life I don't feel too worthy. And when Hal Jordan was selected and these other humans were selected in the comics, none of them were necessarily worthy men. Hal Jordan was not a worthy man, but it was his heart. And the theme of any human being selected for Green Lantern, all of them have flaws. All of them are rough ashlar, but somehow these rings are able to see this man's potential, even in his flaws. So it goes past his flaws to find something that the ring could manifest even larger, to bring some righteousness and some worthiness to his life. And I always thought that was great, because if you look at all the characters inside Green Lantern, all of them are like wild cards. All of them are cynical. All of them are like kind of like on the fringe. There's a couple of them who were like in prison for certain things. Another guy was a race car driver, racing cars on the streets, getting into street fights. Hal Jordan didn't really follow any rules but his own. He was very cynical. So, these guys are kind of like lost souls until they come into this ring and they learn to be a better man.
Number 8.
Our next episode takes us into the world of Western esoteric traditions. For more than 300 years, the practice of Masonic rituals and initiation has been part of the Western culture, spreading far beyond the boundaries of traditional Freemasonry. So what is Western esotericism? Where did it begin? How did the writings and the teachings of that time develop a deep interconnection between faiths and philosophy? Worshipful Brother Milosz Jeziorski, who's also known as MJ Dorian on the Creative Codex podcast, is the Worshipful Master of Compact Lodge number 402, and he joined me on this episode to reveal how Freemasonry appeals to men seeking self-improvement through the lessons in Masonic ritual.
It's best to probably split it up into two parts. So in one first part, we can address just this idea that among people who aren't Masons, who aren't interested in Masonry, in my conversations in the last 2 years with people who are both women and men, there seems to be this resurgence of interest in these traditions. And the impression I get is that culturally and individually, people's spirits seem to be calling out for this stuff. They're in search of this kind of knowledge that offers them unique perspectives on life and deeper meaning through symbolism, which we unfortunately would never be able to find through, our devices and smartphones and such. So, in one side evidence of such a thing is even in the fact that there are 3 universities in the world right now that offer a PhD course in Western esotericism, specifically that term, PhD in it. So it's a very fascinating new field, and I think people are starting to jive with it. Now, in terms of my experience speaking with candidates for membership, in my experience, I know there's exceptions, surely, but it seems that they don't necessarily have a knowledge of these traditions. They seem to have a vague impression of them, that this is related to those things. There's a sense that there is a mystery there, that there is a richness at the bedrock foundations of our Western culture, which we have largely been deprived of, right? And these kinds of intuitions, they compel us. And I certainly had no conscious awareness of something like Hermetic philosophy or Kabbalah when I was becoming a Freemason. But I think I had this intuition that Freemasonry harbored something valuable, or the potential was there for it. And I can certainly reflect that back on you, and you've probably had similar intuitions and such, right?
We're going to make the same statement here, which I think is going to blow some people away, is that I was kind of in the same boat. I came into Freemasonry having more of a religious background, and I was thinking about the conversation I had with my wife on our first date, where I said, would you describe yourself as a spiritual person or a religious person? Because there's a difference between the two, right? And if we're to look at it and say, spiritualism would be that connection, that relationship that we have with each other, with other living, human beings, and sometimes there's a supreme being present, or a common power, or a greater thought or good thought that we all kind of subscribe to, like a code, so to speak, right? And then when you look at religion, where that's a definite, structure of values and beliefs and morals, also has a cultural significance to it, and definitely a role of a supreme being. And, these are very loose terms, but and when I came into Freemasonry, the things that spoke to me that I identified with immediately were the parts of our ritual that do quote Bible passages or have those historical Bible lessons.
Right.
But then what started happening was, after talking with other brothers and kind of opening my mind, those spiritual connections were starting to be made. And I found myself going, hey, let me go get this book about Buddhism, because somebody has made this connection about that, And I started exploring all of these other religions and these cultures and these peoples and these ways of thought. So it's interesting, because I'm like, we're both going to kind of say the same thing here. It's that, Freemasonry was really that door that we opened that introduced us into all of these new ways of thinking that we might not have gotten in our formal upbringing, which is okay, because then on the flip side of that, I think that there are a lot of brothers who are coming in who may not have been dragged kicking and screaming every Sunday to go to church with mom and dad, but are now getting a little bit more of that historical, ancient history, religious perspective outlook on things that also now accompanies the spiritual lessons that they're bringing. And at the same time, there's this great, the sharing, this networking that's happening. So, as brothers, this is the part where it kind of bums me out when we do a podcast, so we have to kind of keep things on the general level. But when you get into talking about ritual and like the deeper, more esoteric meanings of some of the things that we talk about in Freemasonry, you can sit here and go, oh, well, have you ever thought about this, and that this is where this comes from? And you're like, oh, wow. And it takes you there. And when you say it at the open that, hey, we're roughly covering what, 2,000-3,000 years of recorded thought here, like that's a lot of ideas.
And there's a lot of bonding that happens in those kinds of intimate or just one-on-one or small group moments that really we can't devalue or forget about, like what you're saying. And that's really part of it. That's part of like a Masonic experience is diving into complicated ideas with people of like minds or someone or other people you respect, and then coming out of it somehow you've grown in a sense, and you've grown together, especially if, so you came into Masonry with someone that maybe even didn't know, but through the process of the degrees and such, you grow with them. And it's really cool. It's a cool element.
We're counting down the 10 most listened to Craftsmen Online podcasts of 2021. And our next stop is at number 7. On this episode with Worshipful Brother Joseph Martinez of Manassas Lodge number 182 in Manassas, Virginia, we hike up to the peak of our Masonic Mount Rushmore to discuss the greatness of Manly P. Hall.
Number 7.
The first thing I think of when people grab a Manly P. Hall book is, number 1, make sure you have quiet time, because you can't read Manly P. Hall when you're driving to work or you're sitting in the bathroom on a bathroom break or something like that. You have to really devote some time to it. And the other thing is, I hope the first book they don't pick up is Secret Teachings of All Ages. If that's your first, you're just going to be, you're going to get beat up and you're going to be downtrodden, and it's going to be a lot of hard work. So I would never recommend the Secret Teachings of All Ages to, someone who was new to Manly P. Hall and that was their first experience with him. I definitely would not.
All right. So I can see the Brother Martinez home office, library, shrine, toys. I made a comment. He's got toys in the background. That's wonderful. Do you have a copy of the Secret Teachings of All Time in the bookshelves back there?
I do. I have more than one, but my favorite copy is my Diamond Jubilee edition, the full size one. That's got the full color prints and all that stuff. These they were making for decades at the Philosophical Research Society. You can only get them on eBay now. And I think they actually came out with one a few years ago, but when it was originally printed, it was a large oversized book, with full color prints and, all those paintings by J. Augustus Knapp in them, and, just hundreds of pages of awesome sauce. My preference is not for the Amazon paperback copy, because you kind of lose something there.
If he was alive now in our generation, people would probably use the same term they did during his time, which was one of the great truth seekers of all time, because we are always, and this is one of the things I love about Freemasonry, is when you get a chance to talk to interested gentlemen that are coming into the craft, they are searching for answers. And here was a guy who was able to not just provide answers, but also kind of connect the dots on how he got there and gave you the space to kind of come to your own conclusions. But he laid out his case so brilliantly that you basically followed where he was going and you got it. That's one of those things that I think that has made him so great all of these years going by, is now you're looking at the next generation of Masons coming into the craft, the Dan Brown Masons, so to speak. And I know that's part of your story, is you're looking for some of these answers, and here's a guy that did that work. As
I get older, I start to really relax my stance on this. But I do agree that I think a lot of Masons that are coming in nowadays I would put them definitely more in the truth seeker category than the, I want to eat soggy green beans and sit in a boring meeting and just be here for the social aspect of it, because a lot of us are not really that interesting, or cool to be around. But so it's definitely not the social thing. So there's got to be another reason that you're joining. But I find it so hard to believe that people like, just the people you put on your Masonic Mount Rushmore, Wilmshurst and Hall and Pike and Mackey, and going all the way back to Desaguliers, they were all complaining about the same thing, right? It's the same things that we complain about today. The majority of Masons sitting basically on that outer porch, right? And just happy to be there, and that's their thing. But you rarely have, you have that small minority of Masons that actually open the door and go inside and see what's there, and I think it's a constant problem. It's not a new thing that we've been succumbing to. We're just feeling the effects of it more so than any other time in history, right? Because numbers are plummeting, and Masons are leaving and dying at a faster rate than they're joining. And I'm pretty sure you put a disclaimer in at the beginning saying, these opinions are my own, but maybe we don't need to be as big as we were in the 1950s, because I think we were serving a different purpose back then.
What was also unique about Manly P. Hall, when we talk about the time, the era that he was in, is the Roaring 20s. And a lot of us go, oh, yeah, I remember kind of learning a little bit about flappers and speakeasies. And this was, every generation likes to say, oh, we live in a unique time with all these cultural and society changes. And in the 20s, it was pretty drastic. This was the move from country farms to big cities and America becoming industrialized. And, things like people first started not going to church on Sundays and were making these decisions for themselves. And, women were becoming part of the workforce and roles were beginning to change. And here you have this guy saying, whoa. I got some ideas that are based way back in these ancient times that we can put into what we're doing now to get us to a better place. And that's where what is so unique about what he presents is those lessons are still relevant now, almost 100 years later. Well, now over 100 years later.
He's pulling from truths that have, at least in my opinion, have existed for going back to time immemorial, and that's one of his big points in things like Secret Teachings of All Ages and even Lost Keys, is that there is this universal truth, and people express it in so many different ways, no matter who you get on one knee and pray to or kneel to. I find that so Masonic. Really interesting that it was decades before he became a Freemason, but I'm guessing he didn't join because of, wanting to go to the pig roasts and the green bean dinners and things like that. So
Number 5.
Thanks for joining us on this special countdown edition of the Craftsmen Online 10 most listened to podcasts of 2021. We're almost at the halfway point, where we catch up with worshipful brother Luis Gonzalez, who's the past master of Odenton Lodge number 209 in Odenton, Maryland. Luis is one of the most memorable guests that we've had this year. Why? Well, he's got a very infectious energy, not only for life, but also for his passion in the craft. Luis and I shared a conversation on the current movement in Freemasonry to return to the classic traditions and practice of Masonry in and outside of our lodges. You did something that I have only been to one other lodge that actually has this. And it's one of the things that is, when you're first coming into the craft, you've heard of this room, you can't wait to see what it's about or learn what it's about. And we call it the Chamber of Reflection. It's probably one of the most esoteric parts of a lodge, I guess, literally outside of the lodge room. It's connected. And the whole thought of this is that you go into this space, and as a candidate who's going to go through the degrees, this is where you're supposed to sit there and just kind of reflect and think about your motivations for wanting to be in Freemasonry or going through these next couple of degrees, like you're playing it out in your head. They're decorated a certain way. So I want you to share how you created your Chamber of Reflection at Odenton Lodge, but then also how you were able to do this with the guidance and the permission of your Grand Lodge.
Right. So I got to credit my the previous master, past master for me, right? So my education officer and I one day were talking, and we're deep into the esoteric, and we like the philosophical stuff and just having deep discussions, right? Around the world, a lot of places Masonry has. So for example, you go to the Dominican Republic, anywhere you go, there's a chamber. You go to Puerto Rico, 90% or 80% of the lodges have chambers because they do red ritual, right? Anywhere there's a French rite ritual, you go to DC, you can go to La France Lodge, they have a chamber, right? And they do the red ritual, right? More esoteric in a sense, a little bit more esoteric and symbolism than the York ritual that we normally follow here, right? You go to Louisiana, there's chambers, right? We're sitting there, we're spitballing, we're like, man, wouldn't it be great if we take that rinky-dinky closet where we just have to sit there and change and do their thing, right? Then they proceed to start the degree, and we just decorate. I wonder how that would go. So I called the master. I said, hey, he already knows that I've read the Constitution in and out. Here's what I think we could do. And it could just be decoration, right? So my grand inspector, I remember talking, he's like, I don't want to talk. Don't let me know. I was like, don't worry. I will never do anything that would get us in any kind of trouble, right? So we talked about it, but we said it has to be done right. It cannot be foo-foo. It cannot be cheap, because then that's garbage, right? So, and by that, I mean, don't go out and get Halloween props, right? And stuff like that, because that is absolutely, don't do it at all.
It cheapens the experience. Yeah.
Long story short, we had a degree coming in, right? An EA degree. And we had 2 weeks, and I said, okay, you know what? Let's just do it. So we ran in there, we painted the room. I bought paint, we painted the room. And then we started searching and, went and got original type. I don't know how deep I can go in.
You could talk about the symbols. Yeah, that's fine.
And I got all the chemical stuff. And then I went and Shane, Brother Shane, the education officer, he went and built this board and I painted it. And then I took permanent chalk and drew all the chemical symbols and the writing. Anyway, we did it right. And we put it up. And of course, all the other brothers that have never experienced this or never traveled outside were like, what is going on? But they loved it. So the way we did it is like, hey, that's just our decoration. Sit there. We don't mention it. We don't say anything about it. Just sit there. Well, we did that once last year and it went well, right? Well, then I became master. I was like, no, this is going to happen every single time. It just so happens that the first time I'm doing the degree, the Grand Master of Maryland, the Deputy Grand Master, and everybody shows up. I'm like, and everybody's like, are you going to decorate the room? Are you going to do the room? And I said, I would not do anything that I would, in other words, I believe it. I won't do anything that I'm going to hide. Why? That's not true to Masonry either, right? Like the tenets is truth, right? So first thing I do is I show the master and the Grand Master. I said, Grand Master, I need to show you something. And I opened the room and they're like, man, this guy's either going to lose his card right there. Something's going to happen. And he thought it was absolutely wonderful. You're the only lodge that's doing that and you're doing it right. And absolutely wonderful. Again, he also has a lot of that experience, right? The esoteric knowledge. He's deep into that. He takes Masonry very seriously, right? Our current Grand Master. And I love that, right? So when he saw that, it kind of said, you know what? I'm doing it right. Another thing that we added is trestle board. I draw my own trestle board out of chalk. He thought this is not anything luminary. This is just bringing it back to how it was.
It's just doing it. That's really what it is. Yeah.
Can I explain everything in that room? Absolutely. Right. That's another thing that I would say. If you're going to try to do that, then you got to be willing to explain, right? If somebody then asks you, wait, well, what does this symbol mean? Why do you have salt? Why do you have sulfur, right? Why do you have a cockerel or a rooster? Right? Everything has meaning. It's not just a prop, in other words. It's not there to decorate. It's there to instill subconsciously these thoughts in that candidate while he's sitting there and reflecting it. Not only that, but you're going to join something that's for life, right? It's serious.
I'm looking at it this way. It's not just a prop. It's exactly doing what it's supposed to do, is preparing this man to go through the door.
For the journey.
That's the real challenge, is you got to make sure on the other side of that door,
right,
ritual is on point. Brothers are there, focused, ready, on point.
The lodge is a temple. It's not a meeting. It's a temple, right? And one of the things that I do before I open is I let the brothers know, and I say, hey, everybody clear your mind for a second. And let's prepare ourselves for the work that we have in hand, remembering that this is a temple. Whether you go to church, mosque, temple, whatever, you're not there listening to music and hanging out. No, that's outside. Now you're entering sacred space. But right now, this moment is not for us. It's for that candle. Like I said, bring the ritual to life and practice the ritual. If you're not willing to bring it to life and practice it, we're live action role players, right? If we're not going to do this right.
Thanks again for joining us to revisit the top 10 downloads of Craftsmen Online for 2021. This is going to be the final stop for our journey tonight. I hope you join me next week when we count down the top 5 most listened to episodes. Personally, I'm looking forward to geeking out again on our Star Wars and Freemasonry Masonic talk, learning about the many working tools that are present in the Entered Apprentice degree with Brother John Nagy. And we'll hit the high seas for swashbuckling adventure as we reveal the #1 most listened to podcast episode of 2021. If you've enjoyed this flashback, make sure you subscribe to receive our new episodes when weekly downloads return Monday, January 10th. Until next week, let peace and harmony prevail.